Recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so pleased tonight to hear one colleague after another indicate that they are ready to act in a bipartisan way on this issue, and that it should be a bipartisan commitment to addressing the vulnerability of our children. I think that needs to apply to all children. This legislation that we are considering at the moment is one of 7 bills that we are going to approve here in the House today that deal with trafficking, because trafficking remains a serious problem here and around the world. Several of the bills that we are considering recognize that there is an international dimension to this problem. And therefore, I would particularly urge my Republican colleagues and all of our colleagues tonight to remember next week the statements that are being made this evening, and to be as concerned about the vulnerability and the exposure to trafficking of those children who have recently sought refuge in our country as we are about foster children or any other children in our country. While the sex trafficking prevention in this bill addresses specifically problems within the foster care system, the scourge of youth sex trafficking extends far beyond this population. As we're all well aware, we've had a recent influx of children come across our southern border, many of whom have been abused at home, abused along a 1,000-plus mile track, and could be subject to abuse or being involved again in sex trafficking. The Polaris Project, a group that works to help end modern-day slavery, notes that undocumented immigrants are highly vulnerable to sex trafficking due to their lack of legal status and protections, language barriers, limited employment options, immigration-related debts, and social isolation. Most of these vulnerabilities are amplified when the immigrants are children. We have an obligation in this Congress to take their unique situation into account and provide them with the protection and the care that they deserve. The steady drumbeat to remove the very protections that help vulnerable children from becoming sex slaves or remaining in slavery is wrong. And that is why 37 Latino organizations, including MALDEF, the National Council of ARASA, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, among them, all have urged this Congress to assure due process for these kids rather than stripping away rights that this Congress provided in current United States law. A diverse group of faith leaders, including the Southern Baptist Convention, the Sojourners, the National Association of Evangelicals, have joined with these Latino groups in calling to assure that these children are not denied their due process rights, and that they do not have rights guaranteed by American law today taken away next week. Over 50 child development experts from around the country, many of the same people that supported our effort in today's legislation, wrote this Congress yesterday and urge that we change course before we put thousands of traumatized children into danger. They describe an expedited screening process that would leave children in danger. It's the expedited screening process that applies today to Mexican children, and it is flawed. Children who fear trafficking or were previously trafficked can be returned to Mexico to re-enter that trafficking trade and come back again. We shouldn't subject the Central American children to the same process. Yet that's what's been recommended today. I'm concerned about what happens to children along the Green River, about what happens along the Potomac River, about what happens along the Colorado River, but I'm also concerned about what's happening to the many who have just crossed the Rio Grande River. When children are asked about whether they have been trafficked by a police officer who may not speak their native language, in a rushed interview in what may be a chaotic situation in a detention center that's much like a police station where someone who just abused them or who may actually have been involved in the trafficking and smuggling process is nearby and can perhaps overhear these tales, they will be reluctant to articulate the sexual trauma, the very private trauma to which they've been subjected. These children who have been traumatized, in some cases multiple times, who may well have left their native country because of abuse, deserve to be interviewed and evaluated in an environment that takes into consideration their youth, their vulnerability, all of the factors that we've been talking about on this piece of legislation and the other 6 pieces of legislation that the House is about to approve. These children deserve the same type of protections, not an intimidating environment that has made all the unfamiliar to them by virtue of the fact that they're in a land that they've never been to before. This special treatment does not occur and happen if you have an expedited screening process. That's why we unanimously passed the guarantees that are in the 2008 law. If we want to protect these children, we should abandon a plan to throw out these children by the wayside by abandoning those protections. I believe that we shouldn't let our desire, the fears of some, perhaps the hate of others, to result in the quick deportation of children and return them to a life of sex slavery. They are vulnerable children. We don't assure them amnesty. Certainly we cannot accept every child that wants to enter this country. I'm not in favor of amnesty, but I do think we need a little humanity, a little human decency, and that those children deserve the same respect and due process as any child that we're talking about tonight. So I'm pleased that we're making progress on this piece of legislation and another 6 bills. I think they're an important step forward in dealing with a serious international problem, but it's critical that this interest in bipartisan concern for the vulnerability of children extend to those children who are now in my home state and about whom we will be talking in the few days that remain in this Congress, and that we apply the same kind of standard then as we are applying tonight. I reserve the balance of my time.